Got it? Everything's good? Roll sound? Perfect. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just completely here by myself. So I hope you guys are doing well. Today, in Allison's studio, also known as her porch, we're going to be talking about tonality in film, color, evoking emotion, some subjective things, some really kind of ish concrete concepts of secondary color correction, because we've all been over primary color correction, and I know that you guys have had multiple lectures on color, but I'm going to present some concepts that you can then use footage and go and correct that footage yourself so you can have the best looking images possible. Sponsored by Waterloo. So primary color correction, that's what we're doing. We're doing the whole curves, doing the whole RGB curves in Premiere, and possibly you're throwing a Rec 709 LUT from it just because you want to see, you know, how it's going to look, kind of like that HD standard, and going from there, and then you're kind of color correcting your image from there. You can start off from scratch with the curves if you're going into C-Log and that whole thing, but it's just bringing back those values in the pixels, in the data. You want to use C-Log because you have the most post-processing power. That's also when people are like, oh man, did you see the new 10-bit camera? And they get all nerded out, and you're like, 10-bit, what's the big deal? That's because there's more information gathered by your sensor in the data with the pixels than, let's say, 8-bit. Same with 12-bit. And then RAW is just like uncompressed video, and it's just insane file sizes, but you have so much data because it's not squished. Secondary color correction is maybe you guys have gotten your feet wet. You've dabbled in a little bit. Maybe you've done a little bit of masking. Maybe you've like saturated a certain color range, like the greens. But what we're going to be talking about is secondary color correction, why you would use it, why I use it, and then also running you through the HSL secondary color correction tool in Premiere Pro, hosted by the Lumetri Color Panel. So we're dealing a lot with hue, saturation, and luminance in secondary color correction. So hue is what? It's a color, right? Red, blue, green. It's differentiating the actual color that we're talking about. Saturation is how intense that color can be. Also, luminance, or the value of it. So it's how bright or dark it is. So it's like if you mix colors or paint or whatever you did when you were 4 years old, learning that like red and blue make purple, you're mixing like white into that blue to make it, you know, brighter, or you're mixing black into that blue to make it a little darker. And so it's those kind of like value range, and that's our luminance, right? Within that specific color. So secondary color correction, what the hell is it used for? So I use it for skin tones. A lot of times on my sets, I don't have makeup artists all the time. You know, in documentary world, you're not hiring somebody to completely go make someone look flawless. Like, documentary is recording humanity for what it is. And that can be a really, really beautiful thing. I say that to say, like, so let's say somebody has like red splotches on their face, or maybe that lighting or that camera just has a leniency towards magenta or green hues. So you're going to want to take that out of that and get it within an acceptable skin tonal range. That's what I use it for. Grass, sky, stop signs, school buses. We all expect these to be certain colors. So yes, in our grading, we can grade things warm and cool, or we can do monochromatic stuff like the Matrix, but we still expect skin and grass and sky, unless we're in alternate universes, to be certain colors, right? And this is not subjective. This is kind of like, we're just fine-tuning the primary color correction. We're not really using a ton of our artistic influence. So you're either using a window or a matte, or you're using the pixel value with HSL secondary color correction tool in Lumetri color panel with Premiere, which I'm going to show you guys, or you're using a combination thereof. And so this is kind of like the tools you guys have, Lumetri color panel. But if you really, really want to get into color, I suggest another software like DaVinci. Learning that is going to really up your game. But sometimes you can outsource that, especially if you have the budget. I would advise you to do that because these are people-specific jobs. But also, it's not just like a completely post-process. You're also coming into it thinking scene by scene, especially in the commercial world, and also in the filmmaking, indie filmmaking, Hollywood filmmaking, whatever have you. You're coming into it with a pre-production mindset. You know what color schemes you want to use as a DP. You also know what kind of lighting you want to use to emphasize those color schemes, and then also props, like you're using that to emphasize different meanings and emotions. So this comes definitely very much so in pre-production. This isn't just a post-production process. So something to keep in mind. I'm going to show you guys the tool of HSL secondary now. Okay, so here we've got several clips. So I've got an interview. These are all shot in S-Log. I got just some B-roll clip. And then some where we're going to manipulate sky and water and specific color elements. So I'm just going to drag those on. Okay, so we've got a working base. It's not perfect by any means, but I'm going to show you what a little bit of secondary color correction can do. So we've got our curves up here. We've got it roughly balanced. We've got our luminance over here. So we've got a good tonal range. And then you have these kind of folks. You can do some secondary color correction in here. So you can go with the eyedropper and then select a hue, because we're in the hue versus saturation. So if you want to bump up the saturation of a particular hue, then you can go in here and you can kind of bump up that saturation. As we see, it's that particular hue is like really bumped up. We can also adjust, let's say we want a particular green, so we're changing the hue of this selected pixel range. So I want those to be a little greener maybe, or maybe a little brighter orange, depending on my particular color scheme for this. And I want this to be a little warm, so I'm not gonna make it super dramatic. You can also do luminance and that sort of thing. So, you know, if you want a brighter shirt or a darker shirt, it's just going to affect that kind of color range right there. That'll do it relative justice, but what's really going to make things pop and really isolate pixels is your HSL secondary. And so in here you have kind of what you're manipulating up top. You can choose your pixel value up here, and then you're going to do your manipulation down here. So go ahead and select the first eyedropper. So you're setting your actual color. So these are kind of presets, right? Or you can go in and start to select the color. So I did my main eyedropper tool here. And then I'm going to go in here and select color gray. And that'll show me more isolated what I've chosen essentially. You can go into color black or white black, and it's just up to you of preference on like how you really want to see your image represented. And then, because everyone has different tonal ranges and hues on their face, as you can see, it didn't select all these pixels. I'm going to go in and kind of grab, yes, I want a little bit of more of that range. So now we start to see his face come in more clearly. However, we have kind of all these pixel ranges out here. So if we are satisfied with that, and then we start to change it down here, we're really going to see these colors kind of come into the borders of the walls, and because they're both yellow, orange in nature. So what you're going to do is you can move this hue and slide it around. And so this is the color of the rainbow, right? And so this is going to extend it more into the color of the rainbow. And then this is kind of like a little feathering tool. So I'm going to really limit that feathering, and I'm going to really kind of clamp off that hue to a very, very specific color. Same with saturation, right? So as we feather out our saturation, we start to grab other pixels. And as we grab more in the encompassing range, we start to grab more pixels. Luminance is probably where you're going to get your best range from. You know, as I start to feather out my luminance, we're not grabbing too many other pixels, but I'm encompassing a little bit more of his head and a little bit more of his face. And you can continue to fine tune this. And you can also do this eyedropper, which is a minus. So it's like, I want this color and this color, but not this color. And so then you can really start to fine tune it, but you will lose that color. You can denoise it, right? So if you have a lot of noise in your image, or if something's moving a lot, you can also blur it. It's kind of feathering the edges. I like to blur it a little bit. Once you're kind of satisfied with your image, you can unclick it, and now you could start to actually add the effects. So a lot of times with skin tones, I'll warm them up, kind of make them come in a little bit more fuller with that. So as we start to kind of warm him up, he looks a little bit less dead. And same with saturation. Just a little bit, but you don't want to make him look like Donald Trump. You can also kind of do the luminance. This is the bar for luminance. So, you know, this is especially useful if there's like part of his face in shadow and you kind of want to just bump up those shadows a little bit. You can also go into your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights if you like to work within these color wheels. Or you could just come into here and have it be a little bit more simple, I guess I should say. So you see how we kind of like bumped up those values on his face a little bit and kind of gave him an acceptable rough look. You can also continue to add on Lumetri color effects and continue with your HSL secondary. And then you can also go in with your masks, right? And then within there, you can just color correct his face. Or if you're in there and you want to just kind of work within here, you can do HSL secondary just within here as well, especially if you're getting a lot of kind of tones on the outer edges that you're really not willing to manipulate. Like I was talking about, sky, grass, what have you. So I'll go in there, select my primary color, go in there and select a secondary color, check out what I've done in the color gray, and see if I want to adjust it. I don't want to open up that luminance because I don't want to get anything but the sky. And I'm going to blur it out a little bit, and then I'm just going to blue the sky in a little bit. I'm not going to make it look like crazy blue, like we're in some psychedelic world. I'm just going to kind of punch it up just a tad. So it looks like it's a nice blue Florida sky. And so if you don't do this and you decide to do this instead of the hue saturation, so you're kind of bumping up that saturation just a little bit, maybe you're kind of taking in all the blues, and you're kind of deepening the hue a little bit. Maybe deepening the sky just a tad. So that's what that did. And then you can see your HSL secondary really, really isolates it, and curves just kind of gives it that little bit of emphasis, that little bit of pop. So you can work within here with minor adjustments for sure, or like really isolated colors. I would work in here for something like I'm going to increase the saturation of these roofs. St. Augustine is really famous for those like clay beautiful roofs. You can also do the same for the grass. Kind of really pump up that saturation of that image. And I color corrected. I didn't denoise anything or anything like that, but I went in there, I bumped up the saturation on her eyes a little bit. I went in there and I adjusted her lipstick. That was kind of realistically what her lipstick looked like. And then I did my best to even out her skin tone, and then some of it was kind of spilling onto her white hair, and so I got rid of that as well within HSL secondary. I probably put several layers onto this, and this is just a good quick grade to show the client. Okay, y'all, let's talk about tonality. So this doesn't just come into play after color grading and that sort of thing. But a little bit of it does in the sense of color depth, what we're going to talk about in a second. So tonality is essentially kind of like the lights, the highlights, the shadows, the midtones of a frame, and you could really determine that if you kind of grayscale everything out. You have a lot of contrast within the frame, bringing a lot of depth into that. And sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes in the commercial world, you just want to make everything look flat and beautiful. So that's kind of one way to achieve tonality, is actually through lighting your film. You're also using color. And so color adds even more depth to your frame. You think of like progressive, white walls, white apron, sterile sort of look to it, and then all of a sudden you have like Flo with that pop of blue, and then she has like red lipstick and that sort of thing. And so you kind of have those pops of color which add a little bit more depth to it. You have the tonal range of things like Mad Max, but within that orange range you have light orange and then you have dark orange. And then with Amelie you have a good tonal range in color because it's very contrasting colors on the opposite sides of the color wheel. So if you even dissect any film and then you kind of take it and you grayscale it out, essentially like desaturate it, you can see the tonal range of each frame. And then when you add back in the color, you can also see the tonal range of the color. So from like light blue to dark blue, or light orange to really, really dark orange. And this is all extremely subjective. What is color in one culture with the meaning of it in one culture is completely different in another. So just kind of think about it artistically rather than like technically, where you have to abide by certain guidelines. Really go with how you're feeling out the film. To demo this, I just did a really quick shot in a bedroom, light coming in through the window, slightly hitting the person's face, and then changing it from a white balance of 5600 to 3200 and emphasizing different lights, my side kind of nightstand lights turned on to give you sort of different feels to the same character, essentially. So everything that we've talked about today, secondary color correction and grading, it's all there to kind of evoke emotion and evoke a feeling for our audience. That's what we're essentially doing as filmmakers. We're bringing them into this world that we've created or that we're capturing if we're doing documentary style. And we are hoping that they connect with these characters that we create because we're giving out a message. And so if people emotionally connect to these characters, and then they can receive the message of the film or the message of the doc or the message of the commercial even better. And so all these sort of elements, these kind of like notes in the symphony, are there. So tonalities there, how you light something, what colors you use when you light it, grading and post-processing, secondary color correction. Those are all just kind of like fine-tuning elements to kind of really bring out that feeling that you're trying to convey.